Good evening, everyone. For Telesur English, I'm Sarah Begum in Caracas, Venezuela. A special commission of foreign ministers from the Union of South American Nations has met in Uruguay to discuss U.S. destabilization efforts against Venezuela. The meeting was called after Venezuela gave UNASUR details of Washington's actions and called for a united response. The foreign minister of Ecuador, which currently holds the presidency of UNASUR, said that unilateral sanctions by the United States against Venezuela could affect the stability of the region.
In relation to the sanctions, we call on these sanctions rejected by our governments, unilateral sanctions from the government of the United States against Venezuelan officials and from their families and those who have been accused of human rights abuse and the participation in corruption without even mentioning these names in these unilateral decisions. We believe that they may affect the stability of Venezuela and also the region.
In Mexico, an Argentinian forensic team has voiced serious doubts about the Mexican government's investigation into the abduction and suspected massacre of the 43 Ayotzinapa students. The Argentinian experts criticized the government for failing to properly secure the garbage dump where the charred remains were supposedly found. They also accused the Attorney General's office of faulty genetic analysis of samples from family members that would be needed to identify the remains. The document concludes by saying that the investigation should continue because a large amount of evidence has still not been processed. Staying in Mexico, Mexico's Queen of the Pacific drug smuggler was released from prison after partially completing a 5-year sentence on money laundering charges. Avila Beltran, the highest-profile woman linked to Mexico's drug trade, was sentenced to a nearly 6-year prison term in the United States before becoming extradited to Mexico in 2013 to face money laundering charges. Beltran allegedly helped build the Sinaloa cartel in the 1990s, with Joaquin Shorty Guzman, Mexico's most wanted drug boss, until he was captured early last year. The Argentine Chief of Cabinet, Jorge Capetinich, said that Argentina's proposal for the regulation of debt restructuring was accepted by the ad hoc committee of the General Assembly of the United Nations, marking an important step.
Es una propuesta que ayuda o apunta a facilitar los procesos de reestructuración ordenada de deuda.
This is a proposal that helps, or goes in that direction, to ease the processes of restructuring the sovereign debt and promotes the strategy of a mechanism of formal restructuring that will be supervised by 3 states. The second round of debates will take place on April 28th through the 30th in New York City and will be useful to define details of the Argentine proposal. And the third stage, foreseen for the midst of the year, will be the one that allows the final writing of the final document. This is truly a significant achievement from the point of view of international relations, taking into account the current anarchy in this matter.
In Paraguay, a march against President Horacio Cartes arrived in the capital city of Asunción. The mobilization, known as the Long March, was organized by the Piahura Party and peasant organizations. The marchers called for the resignation of Cartes, as well as the construction of a country with a focus on social justice, which has been lost under Cartes's administration. It's a year since the government in Honduras closed down its Ministry of Culture. Some in the artistic world lament the impact that this move has had, but others argue that official backing for the arts never worked anyway. Gerardo Torres has been gauging the effects.
The decision by the Honduran government to close the Culture Ministry 1 year ago, as well as its decision to suspend promotions for the culture and arts, has, according to many artists, meant that it has deeply affected the country's cultural options.
Una pequeña persecución hacia algunos bares, por ejemplo.
There has been persecution against some bars that give space to alternative music and art. They are closed by the police in the night to stop any competition to the franchises that today dominate the Honduras artistic scene.
Llevan los escenarios de la música hondureña a la gente.
Support to the arts has been almost non-existent for several years now, so for Guillermo Brune, director of the National University Library, nothing really has changed for the places that have always promoted art and culture without the support of government.
Actividades que pudiéramos haber hecho con la secretaría o algo tampoco nos vio afectado, pues nunca tuvimos acercamiento.
Activities we could have done with the Cultural Ministry did not affect us because we never had a direct relationship with them. I think the impact of closing the Secretary has unfortunately gone unnoticed precisely because the Cultural Ministry never worked as such. It never really benefited culture.
Nunca funcionó como tal, no llegó a niveles en los que la cultura se vio beneficiado.
The Honduran government has washed its hands of responsibility for culture and the arts and passed it into the private sector. Indeed, there has never been strong artistic promotions by the government, but now the only artists that can really shine are those who echo the line of the government. Gerardo Torres, Telesur, Central America.
The German Chancellor Angela Merkel says her country's alliance with the United States will remain solid, even if Washington decides to arm the Ukrainian government in Kiev. Merkel met President Barack Obama in Washington to brief him on the new Franco-German peace initiative for Ukraine. Obama said his administration does not rule out the possibility of providing lethal weapons, while Merkel insisted that talks on Minsk on Wednesday could still bring a diplomatic solution.
If, in fact, diplomacy fails, what I've asked my team to do is to look at all options. What other means can we put in place to change Mr. Putin's calculus? And the possibility of lethal defensive weapons is one of those options that's being examined. But I have not made a decision about that yet.
Wir sind jetzt aufgefordert, hier Lösungen zu
continue to pursue a diplomatic solution, even though we have suffered a lot of setbacks. These days we'll see whether all sides are ready and willing to come to a negotiated settlement. I've always said I don't see a military solution to this conflict, but we have to put all our efforts into bringing about a diplomatic solution.
des Ukraine-Konflikts eine ganz enge Abstimmung.
For the latest, we turn to Alexandra Hall in Washington.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel is in Washington on Monday, briefing President Obama at the White House on the conflict in Ukraine, among other issues. In a joint press conference between the two leaders, President Obama, who's currently under pressure from some U.S. lawmakers who wish to send weapons to Ukraine, said that the possibility of lethal defensive weapons is one option that's being considered. He also said that Russian aggression only reinforces Western unity on this issue. For her part, Chancellor Merkel said that Russia has violated the territorial integrity of Ukraine, but she also continued to support a diplomatic solution to the conflict, saying that more weapons in Ukraine will not solve the problem. Four leaders from the countries of Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany will meet in Belarus on Wednesday to discuss a possible peaceful resolution to this conflict. In Washington, I'm Alexandra Hall for Telesur.
In Ukraine itself, more than 1 million people have been displaced by the fighting between government forces and pro-Russian rebels. Hundreds of citizens in the city of Slavyansk have organized collection centers for food, water and medical aid. According to the UNHCR, the number of people forced to leave their homes is almost certain to increase.
We were left without a home, without work. We got away here, we rent a room from our grandmother here. There's no money, we have a child with us. We don't know what to do now and where to go. What shall we do? They should find an agreement and stop this war. We're desperate.
They shot. There was shelling. We left with volunteers because it was impossible to live there with kids. One of our houses was already destroyed. And now we don't even have the apartment we used to rent. It's gone. Now everything is ablaze, burning. And I don't think there's anywhere to return to. What more is there to say?
The biggest strike by U.S. oil workers in 35 years just got bigger. The stoppage began in Texas and California a week ago and has now spread to 11 facilities in 6 states. Workers in Ohio and Indiana joined at the weekend. 13% of U.S. refining capacity is affected. The strikers are demanding safer working conditions. Oil and gas workers are 6 times more likely to be killed on the job than other workers in the U.S. Security staff have held a one-day strike at Stuttgart Airport in southwest Germany. As strikers marched through the terminal building, hundreds of passengers had to queue for hours. The unions say the employers are refusing to discuss their demands for decent wages. Russian President Vladimir Putin has arrived in Egypt for a two-day visit intended to strengthen relations with the government of Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. The two leaders are expected to discuss the situation in Syria, Libya and Iraq, as well as the possibility of ending the use of the US dollar in bilateral trade. Political parties in Yemen have restarted negotiations with the Houthi rebels who took over the government on Friday. A number of secular and socialist currents took part in the UN-brokered talks. However, the main Arab nationalist organisation stayed away. The scandal at the HSBC Bank, which helped rich clients avoid billions of dollars in taxes, is raising questions about what US authorities did about it. The Democrat Senator Sherrod Brown is calling for a full explanation. The US government has known about illegal activity at HSBC since 2010. This includes how the bank provided services to drug cartels. Moving to Syria, the country will not allow foreign ground troops on its territory to fight the Islamic State group, Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim said. Press reports over the past few days suggest that the US-led coalition, which has been carrying out airstrikes against the group, may decide to intensify its military campaign.
We defend the Syrian sovereignty. We will not allow anyone to undermine our national sovereignty. We do not need ground forces that would enter to fight the Islamic State group.
A deteriorating humanitarian situation in South Sudan has put 2.5 million malnourished people at risk, according to the United Nations humanitarian chief Valerie Amos. She also fears famine could threaten South Sudan if forces loyal to President Salva Kiir and his rival Riek Machar continue to shell food distribution centres and loot aid supplies.
The humanitarian situation in South Sudan continues to deteriorate. We have 2.5 million people now that are malnourished, and if we don't get to them urgently, their food security situation will worsen. It is now the dry season. It's the time when we have to pre-position, we have to get supplies to some of those very difficult places, because if we don't do it now, we will not be able to get to them during the rainy season.
On a more uplifting soccer note, Ivory Coast won the African Nations Cup by defeating Ghana 9-8 on penalties over the weekend. Ivory Coast earned its victory through the decisive performance of goalkeeper Boubacar Barry. Ivory Coast's last win was in 1992, when it also defeated Ghana in a penalty shootout. And in baseball, Cuba beat Mexico this weekend to become the new champions of the annual Caribbean Baseball Series. The event took place this year in Puerto Rico, and Cuban outfielder Frederic Capita was named Most Valuable Player. With this triumph, Cuba takes its first Caribbean Series in 55 years. Next year's series will take place in 2016 in the Dominican Republic. Ending on technology news, a 13-year-old in the United States has unveiled a low-cost Braille printer with a Lego robotics kit in Sao Paulo. Shubham Banerjee, a Californian 8th grader, has launched a company to develop low-cost machines to print Braille, the tactile writing system for the visually impaired. Braille printers currently cost around $2,000. Those created by Shubham would be priced at only $350, which could bring invaluable support to thousands of blind people worldwide. More on these and other stories on our website, telesortv.net/English. I'm Sarah Begum. Good night.